Walking Transit event on the results of the Urban Land Institute St. Louis study of the Grand MetroLink station. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone out in the cyber world for sticking with CMT for the last 20 months. We were just discussing before we went live, you know, when do we go live again in person and how long do we continue with doing Zoom webinars? So, you know, we're debating those things internally, but I want to thank every one of you who has joined us this morning for continuing to join us on these webinars. We think that this is really important content, and this seems to be the best way to get that information out there right now. So thank you. I'd like to thank all the CMT board members who are here with us this morning. I'd also like to thank CMT's organizational sponsors, our platinum and gold sponsors, including AARP in St. Louis, Bi-State Development, Emerson, BJC Healthcare, Greater St. Louis, Inc., Missouri and Kansas Laborers District Council, ULICO, and Washington University in St. Louis. We would not be able to provide these updates without their support, so thank you. I'd also like to thank our sponsors on this project, the St. Louis Midtown Redevelopment Corporation and its Executive Director, Brooks Ghettiger. You're going to hear from Brooks very shortly. Thank you. As well as St. Louis University, our CMT board member there, Mark Shesley, and ULI St. Louis, obviously, Kelly Annis and her team, and Chris Beard, who is leading this TAP today. Thank you all for your help on this project. As St. Louis returns its focus to job creation, strategies to build back the urban core, and the need to increase ridership on our system, the Grand Station and its connection to the Grand bus line could play a prominent role in attaining those goals. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from a panel of ULI St. Louis members, including, as I said, our CMT board member, Chris Beer with Lockmuller Group, who is the chair of the panel, and also the director of traffic engineering and planning at Lockmuller. Justin Carney, a principal at Development Strategies. Toyin Odawale, who is the broker owner with St. Louis Realty Partners. Bonnie Roy, a principal with SWT Design. And Will Smith with Then and Now. 10 years ago, CMT commissioned a similar study of the Grand MetroLink station, and we've really seen some significant movement with the establishment of a 353 and millions in investment in this area. However, there's still this opportunity adjacent to the Grand Station, the hole in the donut, as we've referred to it over and over again, as well as connectivity, access, and safety and security concerns around the station and that integral connection to the Grand bus line. So we look forward to hearing about the study results and the recommendations to improve the area for transit riders, visitors, and the community at large. The last TAP that we commissioned in 2012 really called for bold actions around this station. And from what I saw on September 23rd, the working day with the ULI TAP, I think this panel has some really bold ideas as well. Before we turn it over to the panel, though, I'd like to welcome Brooks Ghettiger, the Executive Director of the St. Louis Midtown Redevelopment Corporation, to provide a little bit of background of what has occurred over the last decade around the Grand MetroLink station before we launch into what are the possibilities and recommendations coming out of our panel of experts. So welcome, Brooks.
Thank you, Kim. I'm also hearing and seeing the findings from the panel for the first time, so I'm very excited, like hopefully everybody else is that is tuning in to this morning. So welcome again, good morning. First want to thank Kim with Citizens for Modern Transit and Kelly Annis with ULI St. Louis. It's always a pleasure working with the two of them. And again, this time, another successful initiative, so thank you both. The St. Louis Midtown Redevelopment Corporation has been in existence now since March 2017. There's been over $1 billion of investment that has been underway or planned so far, and lots of more announcements to come. So I'm just going to go ahead and show the group, just kind of set the stage here for what is all occurring currently within the area here. So again, this is the St. Louis Midtown Redevelopment Corporation. It's a Chapter 353 redevelopment corporation. The shareholders of it are St. Louis University and SSM Health. Of course, everybody has heard about our one of the largest projects within our redevelopment as the City Foundry STL development. Steve Smith and the new and found team here have been doing a fabulous job of converting this old Federal Mogul site, this old foundry site that had been vacant since 2006. Now what you see here today with just tons of different outdoor events that are happening every weekend and during the week. Of course, the St. Louis's first food hall, 11 restaurants currently with 2 more opening tomorrow. So come on by. See some of that, what has happened on the inside there of the food hall. Fresh Time Market grocery store opens in November. So of course, the St. Louis University community is very excited to have its first neighborhood grocery store right across the street from campus there. And it is a St. Louis store with 110 local vendors that will be supplying 1,000 local products here, 1,000 products within the store. Alamo Draft House is now under construction here on the interior. So that should hopefully open sometime in 2023. So very excited to have Alamo Draft House and 10th Street Movie Theater as part of the City Foundry development. And here soon will be, in the next month, will be the new mixed use building right across from IKEA here, IKEA along Vandevenner that will have 292 apartments. 80,000 square feet of commercial space, and that goes along with the 100,000 square feet of office space that's currently a part of the City Foundry development with the likes of Great Rivers Greenway, Deli Star, Bullhorn, and Orion Genomics that's been in place here for the last year and been located here in the last year. Right across from the City Foundry development is the Element by Westin Hotel that opened in November 2021. 2020, November 2020, 153 extended stay rooms here. The 7th floor up bar is on the top floor of the building there. To the south of the City Foundry is, of course, the Armory building that's been vacant for some time here, but now Green Street Development has already invested $15 million on the exterior of the building with an 80,000 square foot new roof. All the tuck pointing and new windows have been installed. We'll be locating there, also coming online in 2023 will be Rec Hall that will offer and have feature backyard games and recreational activities there. 200,000 square feet of that. And then here's the latest development announced from Green Street. This will just be to the east of the Armory project here. 2 new tower buildings, each 13 stories that will be connected to the Grand Bridge and the Grand Boulevard there that will feature over 500 apartment units. You can see there in Market Street extending on through to those apartment units there. And then to the east of Grand Boulevard is the old Steel Coat building that had been vacant since 1972. This was our first building to actually come online within the redevelopment area here. 33 apartments as part of the Steel Coat lofts. Michael Hamburg with Pure Property Groups has taken on this project, went ahead and also converted the building to the south into 15 micro unit apartments with 5,500 square feet of commercial space, just to show the before and afters of what has been accomplished with those 2 buildings. And the new construction building is the 3rd phase of this, called the Steel Coat Flats building, that is fully under construction and will come online in winter 2022. And then Michael Hamburg is just announcing his 4th project in the area, and this is called the Edwin, that will be on Grand Boulevard here, right next to the famous Captain D's and Captain D's restaurant there, right on the corner of Grand and Shoto. 192 apartment units with 65,000 square feet of commercial space on the ground floor. And then moving southward, this building was able to be saved at Grand and Park Avenue. The Redevelopment Corporation, so far in the redevelopment area, I believe has an outstanding record of historic preservation and being able to save some of these great buildings in Midtown here. This is called the Nicholas Building, now fully under construction with the old fire escape that has come off. This will have 32 apartment units with a ground floor restaurant here. And then what we do is work closely with the neighborhoods adjacent to the redevelopment area. So with the Gate District West neighborhood and the Tiffany neighborhood, and any developments that happen or are proposed within that area are all approved by those neighborhoods. Here's a perfect example of that, where St. Louis University actually turned over 48 lots there in the neighborhood to the community, and the community decided to go ahead and do an RFP process. Home builders Builderama here with 40 new homes and 12 condos that are currently under construction. So the biggest issue that I would say that we have currently is just how to connect to everything. So very excited again as part of this and the part of the Brickline Greenway, and understand what the panel is, how to go ahead again to get across our interstates and the railroads and the MetroLink lines that run right through the middle of our redevelopment area. So I'll pass it on to them now. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooks, for that. I think that really is helpful to lay the groundwork of where we're starting from, what the TAP was looking at when they were looking at this on September 23rd. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to turn it over to Chris Beard and his team of experts to provide us their overlook and the possibilities for the future and recommendations moving forward. I do want to remind everyone that is joining us, we will have a robust question and answer following the presentation. So make sure you get all of your questions in the chat box, and we will get to as many as possible as we move through the presentation. And thank you again to all of our ULI members and Kelly for joining us this morning. So Chris, turning it over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. And I just want to say thank you to Kelly Annis from ULI, as well as Kim Sella, CMT, and Brooks Ghettiger from Midtown Redevelopment for this opportunity to lead this ULI TAP. We're really excited. We've got a great panel assembled here this morning. We're going to do a brief presentation, probably on the order of 30 to 40 minutes. We'll try and keep it short because I know we want to make time at the end for some questions and some really good discussion. So with that, I'll jump right in. So just ULI's mission real quick. So the mission of the Urban Land Institute is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. And so we had this mission kind of in the back of our heads as we went through this TAP panel exercise. So a technical assistance panel, the objective is really to provide advice on land use and real estate issues. So all the panelists are members of ULI. We all got together to basically just provide our outside perspectives on what's happening in this area. And so it's a volunteer effort. We spend a day together as a panel, and I'm interviewing stakeholders and deliberating on the issues affecting the area. And then we come back with recommendations as we're doing today. The final step in our process is to issue a final report, which we'll be doing next month. So we already introduced the panel members, so I won't do that again, but we had a really great cross-section of people involved with different perspectives and different backgrounds, including engineering, architecture and design, economic development, real estate, all sorts of different ideas and perspectives that I think really help contribute to robust dialogue during our working session. And I think it really comes out nicely in the recommendations that you're going to hear shortly. So as we mentioned, the sponsor was Citizens for Modern Transit and the St. Louis Midtown Redevelopment Corporation. So what they charged us with as far as kind of the overarching objectives of our TAP, they posed 4 questions to us that we were tasked with addressing. And number one was looking at the 2012 TAP study that Kim had mentioned. It's been 10 years since that study was completed. And so we were asked to look at what big ideas from that 2012 TAP have been implemented, what have worked out, what still remains to be on the table, what's still viable that maybe is still makes sense today, and how can that help affect some of the redevelopments that Brooks just went through here before we started. So, and then of course, how might these big ideas impact redevelopment on the site? So we started with kind of going back and looking at 2012. Second big question involves connectivity. You're going to hear a lot about connectivity. We all know that the Grand Station is depressed and under the Grand Viaduct. And so this area really basically suffers from a lot of connectivity issues. And so given the great separation and challenges regarding connectivity, what is the best way to integrate the site with all those new projects that Brooks mentioned? How can we help basically connect north and south to try and improve access for everyone? Third question is, of course, around land use. Wouldn't be the Urban Lands Institute without us thinking about what is the highest and best land use in this area. And so given all these redevelopments and the Redevelopment Corporation's vision to turn this area into a district and give it some sense of place, what are the highest and best uses for this site? And recognizing that surrounding areas have very unique development character. So we were tasked with identifying a redevelopment identity for the site. And then how can the site become an asset for the surrounding areas and neighborhoods, particularly those north and south of the site? And so that was something that we put a lot of focus on as we went through our working day. And then the last one is emphasizes transportation. So there's a lot of transportation in this area and a lot of things happening. We've got Brickline Greenway. We've got obviously the Grand MetroLink station. We have the Grand Metro bus, which is the busiest route in the system. And so how can the redevelopment opportunities leverage those transit assets to basically create a successful redevelopment opportunities for the station area? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Toyin to kind of go through some of our considerations as well as the process a little bit further.
Hi. So we started the process off with going over some of the documents that were provided to the team that discussed what was going on in the area, some of the different projects that were already in motion, and just taking all of those things into consideration with our discussion at the end of the day. We also had stakeholder interviews where we spoke with some of the heads of the neighborhood associations in the area to get some feedback from them on what they would like to see that site be and what they would like to see in the area. And then we also had a full day of team discussion where we just really laid out all of the information that we had gathered for the day and started to put together some ideas on where we were going with our thought process. Can you take it to the, okay, there we go. So our considerations were that obviously we wanted to find out what the highest and best uses were, how the layout and topography impacted our ideas for the site, traffic access, the adjacent uses for not only that site, but some of the other sites that were nearby. And then again, taking in that input from the neighborhood associations in the community to find out what they thought needed to be there. A few of our insights that we figured out were that the area was not very walkable. Lots of, just fast traffic going up and down Grand. We realized that Grand is a connection point for many transit riders, and that station was going to be really important in relation to what was coming in for the area, both north and south of the highway there. There was really no great sense of place considering the centrality of the point. So basically, the area or this site didn't really offer much to the surrounding area. It kind of was buried, kind of underground or under the highway there, or under Grand, and it didn't really offer much to the location around it. Safety and security was an issue. The wayfinding was really inadequate. When you're there at the site, you really don't know what is accessible or how to get there. So that was part of our process as well. We talked about the connections from the MetroLink bus station or MetroLink stop to the MetroLink bus and the different points that were north and south and how they were challenging to that location. And then we also took in consideration increased development attention in the area and the different businesses that were coming in. And we wanted to make sure that they were connected. So we were taking into consideration how we can make sure that this site is connected to what's coming in down the line.
Great, thanks, Toyin. Now Bonnie's going to talk a little bit about some of the study area context.
Thank you, Chris. So Brooks and Toyin, I think, have painted a great picture of some observations and obviously work that's already happening in the area to share a little bit more about physical context of the area that we were considering with this tap. Obviously, the Metro symbol there where the Metro stop and MetroLink stop and Metro bus come together. The surrounding context today is still largely industrial with some long time established companies and some alternative uses for those sites in transition. On the upper left, you can see the red roof there of the armory, as Brooks described, that's under improvement today. But lots of moving parts and pieces, not just MetroLink and the proposed Brickline that will happen underneath the Grand Viaduct, but also active rail, which is a barrier, of course. In the next few images, I'll describe some of that context and its physicality. So a view from SLU looking north towards that Grand Viaduct, you can see a lot of current green space. We had a lot of conversation about how there's lots of green space today as these sites get developed, wanting to maintain that sense of connectivity and open space. You can also get a feel here for just the scale of kind of the gap between the Grand District to the north, as well as SLU to the south, and really wanting to stitch these spaces better together. The MetroLink stop itself has great opportunity for improved wayfinding, that overall experience. We had a lot of conversation about wanting to make sure that feels very accessible, approachable, and thinking about ways to do that. The station itself, if you jump to the next slide, Chris, just thinking about how we can make a more comfortable place for people. Today, the MetroLink stop really functions just for that kind of transit transaction. We had a lot of conversation about, in between wait times, making these stations both below Grand and above at the bus stop much more people places, comfortable hangout places, thinking about ways to incorporate that in the future. In addition, we talked a lot about that grade separation. The image on the left is on Gratiot, which is one of the main corridors that goes underneath Grand. And to the right is an image of how a lot of folks travel from the Grand elevation down to Gratiot. There's lots of employees that use transit and then travel down this hillside to get to this sort of underground street level, as we talked about it. Improving that pedestrian connectivity, both across the grade transition as well as on that street life, were also some of the conversations that we had. And this is also Gratiot under Grand. There's a lot of varying uses for the spaces under Grand. Obviously, existing traffic and transportation connections, as well as some industrial uses, as you'll see in the next couple of slides. Existing landowners use some of that covered area for storage, which is a great alternative use, but also thinking about how to better activate those spaces in the future. And as you can see, such a significant elevation difference to facilitate the train activity that happens underneath, but really wanting to make that a more fluid transition from high to low. Lots of barriers to overcome, which you will see in our recommendations. In this image, you can see the armory in the far left, and this is currently used as a bus facility, substation. There's a lot of existing uses that will continue to stay there over time. Obviously, the substation isn't going anywhere, the train life isn't going anywhere. So how can we work with those? The 2012 TAP recommendations, as Chris indicated, the first question that the sponsors asked us to answer was, what of the 2012 recommendations have been successful or implemented, what's still viable? So this is kind of our summary of that. The 2012 recommendation suggested high-speed rail. Our panel is saying probably not. However, there's still a great opportunity to really celebrate this as a transit hub. As we've mentioned, the Grand Bus line is the highest ridership in the system, but it still has capacity to grow. And as new development occurs, really thinking about how to celebrate this transit hub. In the 2012 recommendations, obviously the Shoto Greenway was an element. It is now obviously the Brickline. 10 years later, much further ahead than it was before. We obviously think that'll be a significant component to development and further leveraging alternative transportation within this area. The Chapter 353 was a recommendation in the 2012 TAP. Obviously, the St. Louis Midtown Redevelopment Corporation is now in place. So that's a huge thumbs up and something to really be leveraged with future development. Bringing Forest Park Avenue and Grand intersection to an at-grade crossing. Right now, they are grade separated. We think that's definitely worth continuing to study and continuing to consider, similar to how the Forest Park Avenue and Kings Highway intersections became an at-grade crossing and using that as a case study. And then lastly, the 2012 recommendations had a lot of consideration for platform development, developing on the bridge. You'll see in some of our suggestions that we definitely think that that is still worthy of pursuit, or at least better connecting to the Grand Avenue grade elevation.
Great, thanks, Bonnie.
Yep.
So now we're going to get into the fun stuff, is kind of our themes for 2021, and then ultimately our recommendations. And so I'm going to hand it over to Will to talk about that.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Bonnie. Yes, so to start off with the 2021 themes, connectivity, and we'll stay on this slide for a brief moment, or go to the next. But in this connectivity slide, you've heard a lot about connectivity. It was a large theme in the information that we gathered, but the interesting part about the connectivity that we've discovered and that we wanted to focus on is that this area is connected, very, very, very connected on a macro scale. There's connectivity through 40, there's connectivity through MetroLink, there's connectivity through Metro Bus, there's the Great Rivers Greenway coming through here. There's pretty much every macro level connectivity tool that the region has converges at this point. But it's almost that connectivity on a macro scale that makes connectivity on a micro scale so challenging, because that infrastructure and the topography related to that infrastructure creates barriers to development, to the human experience in this space. And so we tried to focus, and looking at this map here that you can see in the background of connectivity, on how do we shrink the space together? How do we create interventions that allow people that are on the Armory kind of site to be able to move to SLU's Southern Campus? How long does that take? What does that experience look like? And how can we provide some recommendations around interventions that improve that experience? So to dive specifically into several of the things that we are thinking about here with the themes, is that we really shouldn't turn our back onto the Grand Avenue corridor itself. There's currently transit connectivity through that, whether it's bus and train, cars. That currently is the only pedestrian point across the great chasm of the different uses. And so rather than create necessarily an alternative point across, is how can we improve that existing infrastructure? And how do we how do we recommend development and interventions that improve that existing infrastructure rather than replacing that existing infrastructure? So for the first point there is we need a better pedestrian change vertically. There's currently elevators, but how can we more conveniently, how can we improve the experience of pedestrian change between below Grand to onto Grand? We also want to activate Grand at the street level. Right now, walking across the bridge is not really a pleasant experience. I can understand people that have the choice to avoid that experience do choose to avoid it, but there also are many populations that don't really have the choice to avoid that kind of experience. And so it's important to continue to activate Grand for those populations, as well as creating an experience that people can enjoy and choose to walk across. We want to extend the multimodal connectivity. How can we consider the interchange of car, bus, MetroLink, bicycle, pedestrian, all along that corridor, and how they can all coexist in peace with one another. Restoring the street grid. Right now, the scale with the current industrial uses, not necessarily the small businesses, but the infrastructural uses, the scale does not support kind of a street grid and an activated development along Grand. And so restoring that street grid, improving that connectivity will support better, more human scale type of development. And then continuing to support MoDOT's I-64 study, looking at the modifications, which again present opportunities from north of Highway 40 to south of Highway 40 along the Armory City Foundry connection, and increasing the ability to shrink the space and allow for micro connectivity amongst all of these different development opportunities and the existing transit options that exist today. So I thought this was a very powerful slide. The distance kind of between where this photo is taken and where SLU's campus is not really that far. That's, maybe 3 or 4 blocks, yet this, to get from where this photo was taken to SLU's campus is a really challenging and, for a pedestrian at least, a very challenging and unpleasant kind of experience. So again, just all of our recommendations were centered around how do we increase micro connectivity amongst this site, and how do we make the future experience from where this photo is taken to the other side of the tracks and the highway a much more pleasant and possible experience. There's several different tools that we currently have. The first is, how are we thinking about the pedestrian, bikes, and traffic on Grand, opportunities to repurpose lanes, buffer pedestrians, have transit-only corridor or bike paths? How do we increase the options for different uses and different transportation modes safely along the Grand Corridor? Capitalizing right now on the existing high-capacity Metro bus, Grand being the highest capacity or highest perhaps capacity and ridership in the Metro bus system. That is, I think, in a city that does not necessarily have as extensive of a public transit system as we all might like. How do we capitalize on the highest use corridor today and continue to invest in that infrastructure, encourage use and support along that line? We want to enhance the pedestrian grade change vertically, as I've mentioned before. You can see on the right some very interesting activations with both ramp for accessibility to all people, as well as a place to hang out and just practical steps to transition between grade changes. So interventions such as those that really increase both the aesthetic, the access for all, and just the very practical change between grades. Pursuing ramping, as I've said, different kind of interventions in that way to integrate with the Brickline and all the work that they're currently focusing on between both micro and macro connectivity. So a lot of different tools that we were thinking about on these micro interventions in order to increase connectivity in the area.
Great, thanks, Will. And now Justin is going to talk about highest and best use.
Thanks, Chris. I'm wondering, we should have set an over-under for how many times we would say the word connectivity for this, because it's so important, obviously, from a mobility standpoint, but also when we think about land use and we think about identity and we think about equity of this area, connectivity it was that central theme. We spent a lot of time, as Brooks, said it in his introduction, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of opportunity. So we spent a really, early amount, a really big part of our time thinking about what is this district, collectively. There's a lot going on individually. How do we connect it both physically with the improvements that Will was talking about, but also through land use? And is this a district that could become a place that somebody might want to live and maybe live throughout their lives? Is there a way to be intentional about creating elements of this district that are intentionally mixed income, intentionally multi-generational, to allow people to live and not necessarily have to move, or to be able to stay within the district and work and recreate and live? So we spent a bit of time thinking about what could that look like, and how to, where we might be able to bring residential in here. We've been talking about it, through the whole discussion about focusing on connections. And one of the things that it became very evident to us as you look at the projects that have, happened over the last 10 years, they all have an anchor. They all have something, that anchors them, that becomes that destination, and they almost exist in themselves. So how can we better connect all of those and connect this, not just for that mobility and accessibility, but also to understand that the more connections we have, the more opportunities we have for different types of land uses. And so that maybe this site right at Grand doesn't have to have its own anchor. It doesn't have to be a destination unto itself, but it could be something a little bit more mixed, and utilizing the parking and the connectivities to the other anchors as its focal point. We talked a little bit about kind of the short term. We think residential, and continued to kind of focus on that residential aspect, really suits the district. We said, office and hotel might have a long-term feasibility, a long-term viability, really something that probably is going to happen as this district and the cohesion start to come online. Maybe there's more of a market for office and hotel in the future to kind of capitalize on what this district is becoming. When we thought a lot about identity, and we just decided to go all in and embrace connectivity as that identity for this area. Brooks and Bonnie and everyone has been talking about all of the assets that are here and that are emerging with the Brickline. So how do we embrace that and say, this site, this Grand MetroLink station, this, the area right around this, make it a community mobility hub? How do we say, this is an area where we want people to come from the region to this area, and then have the micro connectivity that Will talked about, that once you get here from that regional perspective, how do you then connect throughout the district? And really embrace that, I think, is something that we wanted to emphasize. We were talking about how, these connections are not just connections within the development itself. We think that's critical, and even from a land use and development perspective, it opens up opportunities, I think, on the existing opportunity sites to not have to have their own destinations. They can be that connecting point outwards, but also not just that internal connectivity, but how do you get north and south? How does this not only become a focal point for the district, but but a focal point for adjacent neighborhoods to say there's assets here. There's places I want to go, there's the food hall, there's the foundry, the armory, there's places I want to go to when I come here. But also, if I want to live here, what do I need to live? Where are the services and talk a little bit about it with our equity conversations as well. When we think about equity, we are thinking about that neighborhood connectivity. Go ahead to the next slide, Chris. How do we make this an intentional area, as I said earlier, for people to be able to live? And yes, it may be an exciting, fun place because of the destinations, because of the anchors, but also how do you make it a place that has the services so we don't have to leave the district? And for those adjacent neighborhoods to want to come in, again, if there's that, if we're talking about it as a community hub, and what services are there, I think it was Bonnie that said, accessible and approachable, and talking about that transit transaction, but how do we expand that from a land use perspective so that there's kind of a neighborhood and a commerce and a service transaction that can happen around that, maybe while you're waiting to get, elsewhere along the system, or this is the destination that you are coming to. So we were really trying to think about that from that land use perspective, the identity of really embracing this community hub sense, and saying, once you get here, do I have the services and the things that I need to live here and to link trips, because I'm here for a variety of reasons, and wanted to make sure that those variety of reasons were there.
Great, thank you very much, Justin. So with those themes in mind, I wanted to drill down a little bit here into the recommendations here as we kind of wrap up with our final slides. So we talked about Grand. We really want to build off of what we have on Grand and leverage it as an asset. So we want to create this community mobility hub at the Grand station, recognizing that this is a hugely important interchange for transit between north, south, and east, west. So let's add other things there, whether that's micro transit or scooters or bike sharing, anything at all related to multimodal mobility. We think there's an opportunity to create a hub at this location. And while we're bringing all these transit riders and all these multimodal mobility folks to the space, let's add neighborhood services. Let's create opportunities for people to knock a trip off their list, to do a convenience-oriented trip while they're making a transfer between the Metro bus and the MetroLink, or while they're at this mobility hub. We, as Will mentioned, we want to emphasize Grand as the primary north-south linkage across the tracks. We think that's a nice asset that we really need to figure out how to make work. That provides all the connectivity to the station. It's already there. It's already linking SLU Medical Center with the main SLU campus. So let's look at how we repurpose the space on the Grand Viaduct to make it safe and effective for all users, not just cars. So whether that's taking out the median, reducing the width of the lanes, adding barriers to better protect pedestrians and bicyclists from moving vehicles, we're recommending that we pursue strategies to figure out how to create that safe space on the Grand Viaduct. And we talked about vertical transportation between Grand and the station below. So we're recommending that we look to provide a more open and visible means of vertical mobility at the station, rely less on elevators and create more open means of vertical connections, whether that's more grand stairwells, whether that's ramping integrated into stairs. But we want to create a better vertical mobility experience for people going from above and down below. And then as additional developments come online adjacent to the station, we think there's opportunities to integrate vertical mobility into those developments. So that could be an opportunity to not only provide neighborhood services on the lower levels of those projects, but we could also potentially look at having public connections up and down that are part of those projects that then include those neighborhood services. So it's all integrated as one big community mobility hub type area. We think we should have a crosswalk across Grand between the Metro bus stops. I'm sure anyone that's driven along there has seen someone who's come up and realizes they're on the wrong side of the street and is darting across unprotected. So let's go ahead and just provide that safe crossing opportunity for folks who aren't on the right side of the street. And then also consider opportunities to enhance provide enhanced Metro bus waiting areas off of Grand. When you're sitting there waiting for the bus and you're right there at the edge of the street, it's not a comfortable experience. So as additional developments come online, there's potential opportunities to create better spaces, not immediately on the street, but slightly off the street, to create those more hospitable waiting areas. And then we think there's opportunities for improvements at the station level itself. We think it lacks kind of placemaking features. So we're thinking things like overhead LED lighting, public art, perhaps there's some sort of water features that takes advantage of the grade difference to have some cascading type of water feature. So just anything that can kind of help define a sense of place for the lower level station. Restore the lower level street grid. We think there's going to be an opportunity for this. There's a lot of disjointed streets in that area. So we think that that's another opportunity. Metro has a small parking lot in the area. We're not thinking that commuter parking or park and ride we don't believe that to be a key ingredient to the future success of this area. So we think if there's opportunities to better position that property for a better use, that we should go ahead and take advantage of those opportunities. And then lastly, integrate the Brickline Greenway. We know the Brickline Greenway is going to be coming to the Grand Station. So let's figure out how to integrate that into everything else we're talking about. And so there needs to be a component of the vertical mobility that speaks specifically to bikes and to getting Brickline Greenway folks from down below up to Grand. And then maybe even providing services for bikes. That could be part of the convenience-oriented neighborhood services that we're looking to bring to this community mobility hub. In addition to having the fruit stand or the vegetable stand or the coffee shop, let's look at having potential services for bikes, so that as bicyclists are coming through, if they need repair services or things like that, that could potentially be something that's part of the equation as well. And then north and south of the station, we've talked a lot about that. We really need to encourage the multimodal connections from this new community mobility hub station area to all the different things that are happening around it, whether it's Foundry, Armory, Chaffetz Arena, the SLU's main campus, SLU's medical campus. We really need to look beyond just the station at how those connectivity improvements extend north and south. So we do really think something needs to happen at Forest Park Avenue and Grand. That intersection's been studied for some time. Creating some sort of fix there we think is important. On the south side, Bonnie mentioned the lack of vertical connectivity between Grand and Gratiot. That's really going to be important to trying to serve those developments that are happening just south of the tracks and giving those folks an opportunity to get north and walk to the station. And then we mentioned that MoDOT is embarking on a study of the I-64 corridor, and they're looking at reimagining interchange configurations, potentially jettisoning excess right-of-way. And so we think there's really an opportunity to partner with MoDOT, work with them through that process, and look for opportunities for new developments as well as restoration of multimodal connectivity coming out of their efforts. So that's a really exciting thing that's happening. So I'm going to turn it back to Justin to just key on our development recommendations before we close out.
Yes. So, when we think about cohesion of this district from a land use and development perspective, we were talking about creating, having the Redevelopment Corporation create, development guidelines, really define what they want this district to be, establish criteria that to be considered as new projects are coming forward for consideration. Part of that also might be considering implementation of a form-based code to kind of really pull all of that together from a district standpoint. We've been talking a lot about connectivity, and I think Will kind of introduced this whole regional concept, local concept. And so we really, talked about that from the standpoint of the local connectivity really needs to be supported and enhanced by the developments as they come online. And so requiring those developments to prioritize transit, biking and walking, over cars for that district mobility, but then also recognizing there's a regional attraction here. So people are going to still drive to this area, drive to the anchors and the destination points. So, maybe consider having, a parking management system district-wide that allows the different developments to share parking at different times because of the different uses, and really try to lessen the need for parking at individual sites as the district continues to grow. We talked a bit about, and I believe Bonnie's going to talk about, how do we get development to, up to and connected to, the elevated portion of Grand, and really try to make that development connectivity happen. That can also, create and activate Grand as a more active space, especially there around the MetroLink. But then also it should be able to help alleviate that vertical connectivity. And then, obviously, how do we enhance those public realm connectivities that we're also talking about? And one way to do that is to have dedicated funding through a TDD or some other tool that the district could bring, to enhancing that public realm and that connectivity on the street. Another couple of, just to kind of enhance that, we will talk about, and I think we've got a couple images yet at the end here. How do we expand that space off of the Grand Viaduct? How do we connect them to the developments that are happening so it doesn't still exist, even with the developments happening closer and closer to that, it doesn't still exist as a, as a donut in the middle of all of this. And then finally, we kind of, from that identity perspective, really embrace the Prospect Yards name as a branding for the district, and talk about it again from that community mobility hub, and really rely on the anchors that are there. Obviously, new developments are going to have anchors with them, but try and connect them in a way that doesn't require those anchors, and we can utilize the ones that are there, and really maybe diversify the land use and development yet to come.
So to highlight sort of what we've been meaning by enhancing this public realm adjacent to Grand and really making the Grand Avenue street life a critical component of new development, building upon the Green Street proposal, which is the image on the left. You can see, there's a bit of a gap indicated between the tower itself and the Grand Avenue Viaduct. And what we're suggesting is to close that gap, to really encourage development, to embrace the Grand Avenue streetscape, to really create street life that narrows that north-south disconnect as much as possible. And then within those developments, being able to then transcend to those lower elevations, those lower levels, to connect to the Brickline Greenway and to other assets within these developments. The images in the center and on the right are from a former ULI Heinz competition. The winning proposal, you can see some of those recommendations that we're making illustrated in that development, really making that connection to Grand and then down to that network below as well.
Fantastic. Thank you all. So we really feel that it's time to connect the dots, that this district is about leveraging all the assets that are here, all these entertainment destinations, all these residential developments that are emerging, but creating, as Will said, that micro connectivity to make sure that this district has a sense of place. And we believe that's really going to help create even additional momentum for further development. And so with that, we would gladly take any questions that you all have.
Great. Thank you so much to the panel. I think that this is just excellent information. And we do have some questions. The first one is, how does the panel feel goals of organizations like SLU and SSM, or potentially the surrounding developers, how can their goals impact the transit conversation at this site? And Bonnie, I think you referenced the Green Street project just a minute ago about how if that project extended to Grand Avenue, that might be one way that developer could really impact the conversation. But when we look at the major stakeholders, SLU and SSM, what do you think what goals or what objectives can they have that can impact this transit conversation at this site?
Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Well, I can
go ahead.
I was just gonna, I think one of the points that we were making when we were together is there's so many different anchors nearby, and especially right now. And I also say, I'm with the team behind City Foundry, and we've been thinking about this a lot too. So I'm sharing a bit of a perspective from that point as well. Parking and the increased the pressure to have enough parking is very, very real. And to the extent that we can reduce that pressure by figuring out ways to create a better transit experience is a very real benefit to all of the entertainment and lifestyle and housing and kind of everything that's going on here. I think a little bit about the, I understand that SLU and SSM and the North and South Campus have different connectivities already that they're investing in between that area. And so how do those fit into this broader picture as well? And I think that the last piece that I would say is right now there's definitely a labor challenge across the board, especially when it comes to service labor. And I think that, again, transit should be for everyone. The reality right now is transit might be only being used by those who have to. And I think it's really, really important to continue to increase and better that experience. I mean, if someone who's working at Foundry that takes Metrobus or MetroLink to get there, if we can, it supports what we're working on as well, to have good access to our site and pleasant and not a poor experience to come there. So I think for both customers, for residents, for workers, for everybody across the board of all the developers in the area and for the major institutions in the area, this experience of how do they get from the transit to the different kind of destinations. What does that experience look like? It's just so important to kind of everyone in there, and what current investments are being made in that last mile connectivity, and how can we think about them all together? Not just SLU has theirs, SSM has theirs, Foundry has theirs. We all kind of have our own. How do we think about this all as kind of as one improved system for everybody?
If I could piggyback on that for just a second, another thing that our team talked quite a bit about, or the panel talked quite a bit about, as a shorter term goal would be really just improving the wayfinding and awareness of all of these partners and assets. That if you were to able to get off the MetroLink and see a sign that says, this is 5 minutes this way and this is 10 minutes that way, or even that grander connectivity of things on South Grand that you can get to via Metrobus, via 10 stops or whatever it might be, making that much more accessible to people would strengthen that sense of place, as well as connectivity to a lot of the assets that are here today, and be able to build upon that as new development occurs as well.
Yeah, and I think just transit helps bring people to sidewalks. It helps, it brings bicycles, it brings activity. And I think that with that activity comes safety and security in numbers. And I think that helps contribute to the vibrancy of the area. So the more folks we can get out of their cars and have walking to the station, walking in the area, just connecting via different modes, I think that helps contribute to the sense of place. And I think that's what SLU and SSM are looking for. I mean, I think from a SLU's perspective, you're trying to attract students and you want them to come and see this. Wow, this is really an exciting place to be. There's a lot happening. There's activity. It feels activated. And I think transit is a key ingredient in basically contributing to that type of environment, that urban environment that I think people are looking for.
Right. So with all of the recommendations in this presentation, we've had a couple questions about what do you view as the timeline for this? And I find that a really interesting question because it's been 10 years since the last TAP, and we've seen a couple recommendations put into place and others have morphed or changed over time. But with some of the recommendations that came out of this study, what would you view is an anticipated timeline if they were to move forward?
Well, I would say the great thing about where we're at now versus 10 years ago is development interests are here. And I'd say 10 years ago, to hear about some of the projects that we went through earlier today, And to know that all of those are happening, I think everyone would have been blown away 10 years ago. So I think the opportunity is before us. With the development pressures are here and the interest is here. Now is the time to put some of these things, these more short-term ideas into place. Things like putting in place a form-based code, things like establishing development guidelines to make sure that we're getting the right kind of development, and that now that the market is here, we don't have to be quite as aggressive to try and attract the development. Now I think we can make sure we've got the right kind of development coming. And so making sure that developments are required to be connected and to have connectivity, whether it's to Grand, or perhaps developments need to be thinking about being pro-transit. Maybe they need to include bike parking. Maybe they need to include parking maximums to try and reduce auto dependency. I think now is the time to start thinking about those types of measures so that we're attracting the kind of development that we're going to be happy with, not only today, but well into the future.
Great. And I think that you just answered another question that came in. Where do you start? These recommendations are robust. So who does what first? And Chris, I think you just hit on that one with that answer. So another question that's come in is, what is the future plan for the Corgan property site in the industrial area underneath Grand? Is that something that anyone would like to address?
I'm happy to jump in. Corgan was a stakeholder we met with. We toured their site. They're definitely, a large property owner in this area. We had a lot of conversation about their logistics. Development is going to happen directly around them, right across the street on Gratiot. There's proposals. And so, I think over time, their viability and their comfort in the neighborhood, if you will, may change. I think as today, there's a lot of ways to work with them there. They're very interested in improving that connectivity and verticality from Gratiot to Grand. They could certainly be a partner in that. I think long-term, we see this all the time. Industrial uses can either commingle well or move to other parts of the city when the price is right. So I think there's a lot of variability there. I think they'll be, a great advocate in this evolution of this area of the city.
Thank you. So another question is, what was Bi-State's role in this process in the ULI TAP? And so I will let you guys jump in, but one of the TAP chairs is actually John Langa, who is the VP of Economic Development at Bi-State. So they were a big partner on this, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, John participated in all of our stakeholder interviews that morning, and actually was a stakeholder interviewee himself. So he was able to provide the perspective from Bi-State, and and John's emphasis is economic development. So he's always approaching transit from the lens of how can it contribute to the greater good in terms of successful development, particularly in this area. So John was absolutely part of the process, and we really appreciated his input as we went through our working session.
So we have a technical question from the panel. Will having the buses pick up passengers downstairs at the Grand station itself help with traffic flow and safety issues in your perspectives?
If I can jump in on that one, we had a lot of conversation about this. To bring them to the same elevation, how does that help? And I think where we landed is we don't necessarily think it would. It would certainly have an impact on the bus route timing and bringing, I think that the large objective here is to bring people to the Grand Avenue street life and ways to really blur that line between the MetroLink Brickline area below grade, and really strengthen those connections between the two so they don't feel so disconnected from one another.
Yeah, I think we had concerns about ramping and how much physical space that would take to get buses down. They're going to have to turn off and on Grand. There's going to be a lot of extra time added to the running times for Metro. That comes at a cost. It comes at is a disadvantage to transit riders that are just trying to travel north-south through the area. So I think we thought about it and just thought that, yeah, I completely agree with what Bonnie said, that we really wanted to try and focus the activation on Grand, and we just thought there were too many physical challenges with trying to get buses down below.
So during your conversations, one of the questions that's just popped up is, was there any particular emphasis on preserving the public green space in these plans?
I'll jump in on that one. It was funny. We were talking about, so our vantage point, in our office space when we were together overlooked, this entire site, and it's deceptive. There are a lot of vacant areas that are green, but it is, are they, value enhancing green space? And so I think some of the conversation that we had about, how do you develop this area and still preserve what appears to be green space right now? But while we were looking out the window and contemplating this, there were two motorbikes sort of doing motocross on one of the vacant parcels, right? And so it's like, that's not the green space. That's not kind of what we're talking about trying to preserve here. So I think from our perspective, and team, jump in if I'm kind of mischaracterizing it, but I think we were saying, yes, these are, they're currently green, but they aren't necessarily value adding green. So as these sites do develop, it is just a matter of how do you enhance and create value adding green space. And part of that is those development guidelines that I'd mentioned in one of my previous slides, and having very specific criteria that says, as these sites develop, what does that active green space look like? How does it enhance, and can you use that, to actually enhance some of the connectivity issues that we've been identifying?
I think one of the other big differentiators is public. Those large green spaces that are there today aren't necessarily public. They're maintained, and maybe the public are welcome, but they aren't necessarily public. So making sure that as development occurs, that they're required to create places that are very welcoming to all. Even in some of the residential developments, if they've got restaurants and retail and mixed use, how do we make sure that those become viable public spaces?
Just a couple more questions I think we have time for. And this one, how do we collectively strengthen the focus on transit as a centerpiece identity element to support centers like this of both commerce and livability? From your perspectives, after spending a day and a half looking at this site.
It's a good question. So it's can you repeat it again, Kim? Say the first part again.
How do we collectively strengthen the focus on transit as a centerpiece identity element? So how does transit become really a key part to support these centers of both commerce and livability?
Yeah, I think we really need to think about how do we make transit integral to future development and really honestly the ongoing development. I think it becomes, the more we make it a focal point when we're talking to developers and that we're incorporating transit supportive aspects into everything that's happening in the area, I think then it's sort of itself kind of rises in importance, right? So I think it's things like everything that we've kind of talked about, I think kind of is trying to do that, is trying to further transit. So it's like things like wayfinding, things like enhanced public realm. I think if we're doing all these things and they're all complementary to getting people to the station, I think we're hoping that sort of is almost self-reinforcing, that this is kind of the type of behavior that we're trying to encourage, and we're hoping that if a few people start doing it, okay, well, oh, wow, my next door neighbor, now he's walking to the transit station. Why can't I do that? And then you do it, and then you realize, oh, okay, this is they've got lighting, they've got it's not so scary on the Grand Bridge anymore because it's now the sidewalks are buffered from moving traffic. And we're hoping that then the more people that do it, it just kind of, starts to, it starts to build more momentum for that. But we think it's not necessarily a silver bullet thing. We talked a lot about that. In St. Louis, we tend to like to rely on silver bullet planning, where we come up with some magic thing that just all of a sudden, great, we're where we want to be. And I think we're thinking it's more of a combination of all these different ideas and these different things that hopefully contribute to an environment where transit can be a centerpiece. And I'm sure others can add on to that, but I think that was kind of collectively where we were going with that.
Okay, great. So final question. What is the key takeaway from each of you to the audience today on the opportunities you saw around the Grand MetroLink station? What spoke to you during your day and a half investigation of the station and meeting with stakeholders and riders and others? What do you think is the key takeaway about this station? It's really important to CMT for us because we're a decade in now. So we'd like to hear what the new perspectives are for sure.
Well, one thing we haven't mentioned is the fact that Metro has made a significant capital investment in new buses on the number 90 Grand that are awesome. They're electric. They look really sleek. They have an identity to them. And it also happens to be currently today, and when you think of North-South Transit in St. Louis, it's the number 90 Grand Metro bus is it. And so we're at an important crossroads between North-South Transit and East-West Transit that we don't think maybe gets the attention that it deserves because of the physical configuration of the station and the lack of micro connectivity to the immediate area. So the way I think of it is I think there's tremendous opportunity here to leverage what we have and just build upon it by creating the right framework for successful development, the right framework for connectivity, and to really just capitalize on what's already here today, not to mention all of these amazing anchors and amenities that are really within a 10-minute walk of the station, but people don't intuitively think to do that because it's difficult and it's not comfortable. So I think we've got a tremendous opportunity in front of us here to just basically try and take advantage of what's here and just try and get it right moving forward.
Right.
I would add, I think the greatest takeaway in my perspective is demanding a development pattern that fosters this connectivity, that connects to the Grand Avenue Bridge elevation, that enhances and embraces the Brickline at that lower elevation, transcending really that grade change in a way that it becomes no longer a barrier, that you can weave from SLU's South Campus over the Grand Bridge, down to the Armory, across to the Foundry, really making an interconnected public infrastructure network that then can leverage transit and other connectivity at that macro scale. So defining that micro scale is just critical.
Yeah, I want to echo what Bonnie said. We did a little bit of an exercise where we just thought about both on a macro and micro scale, what is possible to access if we can figure out ways to increase that micro connectivity. I think a little bit, from where I often am at Foundry, we've got a Target coming in kind of on the opposite corner now of this type of development or this study area. How do we get those more connected together? If someone's living at SLU or someone is working at SSM after work, again, with better connectivity and transit, they don't have to drive to any of the immediate spaces, as well as you think about what's available along the 70 corridor. You've got Grand Center, you've got Cherokee Street, Tower Grove, South Brand, SLU, SSM, and Fairgrounds Park, and the connectivity from the Brickline Greenway. So there's all of these spaces where theoretically, if we can increase the micro transit level, workers, students, people living in the area have just access, not via car, to so much more in the entire region, not to mention downtown via MetroLink and further west on MetroLink as well. So that was the big thing for me. Last 3 years before COVID, I was a transit first rider outside of St. Louis, and I think creating a node like this is a way to kind of create a transit first by choice type of experience in St. Louis.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway was just how important this station is to the surrounding area, both north and south, and how much of an impact the right investment into this site could make on the lives of so many people that live in the immediate area, from just a daily life standpoint to an entertainment standpoint. So it's definitely a site that needs this attention put on it. And I think that it can really have a really big impact on people's lives moving forward.
Yeah, and I think, from my perspective, thinking about, and Will touched on a little bit, what's the impact of parking and parking requirements on development and development feasibility? And, do developers want to build, good quality, developments with a lot of parking, or is there an opportunity to really lean into this micro connectivity and the transit connectivity, reduce the parking needs? And what kind of additional development opportunities come from not requiring, people to park and drive all the time? And so if we really lean into that, and then does that create new opportunities for development with shared parking and parking management and all of the things, and then the connectivity to the transit that allows that mobility? Do we get different types of development in this district that can really kind of start to fill it out and flesh it out?
Right. Brooks?
Yeah, Kim, I just wanted to say, I think the panel did a fabulous job. I think hitting on it again, where it wasn't just a silver bullet response, but all of these recommendations, I do believe, are very much feasible, things that we have been talking about and thinking about for a while. And I think it just kind of, again, gives us that extra response here that we should move forward on some of these. What I would say, just overall, looking at it and what the panelists talked about, is we are finally getting a chance, an opportunity for St. Louis's Midtown to be a place like other cities, midtowns, where it's not just where you go to for education or healthcare, but you do actually go to for a host of different services, for retail, for entertainment, for additional jobs and that. So all of these recommendations will help that, and will help connect the city and the region really to the Midtown area to go ahead and take part in all of that.
So I want to thank all of our panelists, and I want to thank everyone who attended today. I know that there were a lot of comments about, bus driver shortages, and this is impacting operations on our system currently, and it most definitely is. And this is the biggest critical issue that we're hearing from all of the transit providers across the state of Missouri and nationally. Operator shortages are impacting service right now. Part of why we're doing things like this is we also have to look to the future. So what is the future of public transit look like, and how can we utilize this as a tool, and what are ways that we can increase access and connectivity moving forward? So I did see your comments, and we took them in as consideration, but today we were focusing on what could be done to improve the connectivity and access to the Grand Station in the future. And we are working with transit providers across the state of Missouri right now on techniques they can use for recruitment and hiring. So I did want to let people know that we did see your comments, and we are paying attention, and we know that also safety is also an issue. And part of the conversation today around the Grand Station is increased activity, increased eyes on the street, increased ridership will also impact that safety and security conversation as well. So I want to thank all of our panelists. I'm really excited to see the recommendations that have come out 10 years later, and where we are today from where we were 10 years ago. It's been a huge leap in investment, and I know a lot of that is due to the work that Brooks and his team are doing. So thank you all for joining us. We will have a recap of this presentation on our website. We will also be posting the final report once it's available in November. This panel has done a yeoman's work of looking at this station and ways to think outside the box. And when I started this conversation, In 2012, there were bold ideas, and I would argue once again, there are bold ideas around the Grand Station, and we just hope that we will be able to do something to move those ideas forward. I want to thank Kelly and your team, Kelly, and the ULI St. Louis for helping us with this. The ULI taps are a great way to continue conversation around some really important topics. This is probably our 4th or 5th tap, I think, that Citizens for Modern Transit has sponsored around, 6? Wow, I've lost count in my old age, around MetroLink and MetroBus. But I think it is a really great tool that others should consider to really have that in-depth conversation about what possibilities are and to be able to convene this group of experts. So thank you very much, Kelly. And that's just my little 30-second commercial for the TAP program. I think it's excellent, and I think it's something that others should really consider. I want to thank everyone who has joined us today. We will post this video to our social channels later this morning, as well as the presentation. And please look for additional information about upcoming events, where we're going from here, and we'll continue to be MetroLink for a decade. So we're going to continue having these conversations. And I just want to thank everyone for your time today. Have a great day and make it a good one. Thank you.